to part 2 of the Dino Apocalypse tutorial. In this video, I want to give you an idea on how I animated the dinosaurs and the background of the animation. For this tutorial, I'm starting out with an entirely blank and empty project. So let's start by importing the images. As a reminder, I have every moving element as a separate image with a transparent background. And as well the empty background image. That's the setup you need to create this type of composition. In my previous tutorial I talked about animating the meteor, so this time let's focus on animating the dinosaurs. Let's begin by importing the background. I drag and dropped it into the project. First things first, let's adjust the canvas and background size. Let me check the background dimensions. The dimensions are 911 times 438. Yeah, okay, I'm not gonna roll with those dimensions, I don't like that at all. So let's go back into the project and via the edit menu in canvas size, let's set the canvas size I want. 800 times 450. I prefer those round numbers, it's just less headache. Let's adjust the image as well a tiny bit. And now it's time to bring in the dinosaurs. Let's see if I can import them all at once. Nope, that doesn't work. Right now you cannot see the T-Rex because it's covered up by the background image. So I drag the T-Rex above the background in the layer tree and place it where I want it. Now let's import the remaining images one by one and then drag them above the background image in the layer tree. Now I'm gonna place each one of them correctly. Whoops! I accidentally dragged that one out of the canvas, so let's bring him back. So let's go right ahead and start animating the dinosaurs, starting with the T-Rex. I select the T-Rex, called Dino 1 in the layer tree, and you can very easily animate images via the Images Timed panel. In the Timed panel, you can create timed animations, which simply means that the animations loop and repeat. And the first animation that I want to add is a rotation to make the T-Rex tilt up and down. So I click the rotation tab and change the values. Actually, I forgot to tick the rotation tab to activate the rotation. So let me quickly tick the box in front of the rotation tab to activate it. And now the T-Rex has this nice rotation animation. And obviously he rotates way too much. So I will quickly adjust the values. There you go. And to make it look a bit more realistic, I'm also gonna add a skew animation. I tick and activate the skew tab. And then I play around with the values until I have a result that I like. And right now the T-Rex is rotating around his center point. And obviously I want him to swing back and forth while standing on his feet. I do not want his feet to rotate. So I'm gonna change the rotation point by changing the center point in the Properties panel and moving it down to his feet. There you go. Now that looks great. I'm placing the T-Rex a little higher. With the new center point, I believe the T-Rex could move a little less. So I'm going to adjust the rotation and skewing levels a little bit. Now in the same way, let's add an animation to the long-necked dinosaur. I select Dino 2 in the Layers panel. Let's start by adding some rotation. I tick the rotation box and now let's play around with the values. Then I do exactly the same to add a skewing animation. As before, I'm going to change the center and rotation point, so that it doesn't look like the dino is rotating in the air. I move into the Properties panel, and again I move the center point down to the dinosaur's feet. Let me adjust the dinosaur's movement a little more. I'm playing around with the values until I get a result I like. And I'm gonna use a little trick that I'm gonna show you. While I leave the skew animation time to 1 second, I'm gonna make the rotation animation last for 2 seconds. This way, while the dinosaur rotates once, it is skewing twice. So it basically creates 4 different neck movements, which looks more dynamic and realistic, as you can see in this exaggerated animation. I adjust the values a little more until I'm satisfied with the looks. One more important thing that you need to pay attention to is that the timeline's duration is currently set to 1 second, while the rotation lasts for 2 seconds. And the timeline is basically like a master controller, so if the timeline lasts for only 1 second, it won't allow any animation to last longer than 1 second. So in the timeline settings, I make sure that the timeline duration is at least 2 seconds long. And now, if you watch the long-necked dinosaur very carefully, you can see that there are 4 neck movements with subtle differences. Sometimes the forward movement is stronger and sometimes the backward movement. That's because of the trick that I previously explained, where I set the rotation time to 2 seconds and the skewing time to only 1 second. Now let's go ahead to the flying dinosaurs. I'm selecting the first one and I want to add an animation as if it was flapping its wings. And again, we are going to achieve this with a timed animation, but this time with a scale animation. So let us tick and activate the scale animation. And I start with an X scale animation, which will animate the image's width. Then I also want to add a Y scale animation for the height. Now the Y scale needs to be opposite to the X scale, so that when the width gets larger, the height gets smaller. And when the height gets bigger, the width gets smaller, to create this wing-like effect. I play a bit more with the values, and now he flaps his wings way too slowly. So let's reduce the animation time for both the X and Y scale. There you go, that looks great. Now let's do exactly the same thing for the second winged dinosaur. Now you can see it looks a little bit awkward and skewed because the dinosaur was already rotated in the original image. To fix that, I'm gonna add a skew animation to it to counter the current skew. I tick and activate the skew animation, set the same time as for the scale animation, and adjust the values to make it look better. Nice! Now the next thing I want to do is to have the dinosaurs fly across the canvas. And I'm going to achieve that via position keyframes in the timeline. So let's scale the timeline up a little bit. I want the dinosaurs to fly over a duration of 3 seconds, so I increase the timeline's length. To start keyframing, first I pause the animation. I can do that by clicking the stop icon in the timeline or by simply pressing spacebar. Next, I'm gonna drag and drop the timeline marker to position 0 to the very beginning of the timeline, because I want the dino to have the current position at the very beginning of the animation. And now I'm going to add the position keyframes for both the X and the Y value. You can see that when I drag the dino around, the X and Y position values change. So those are the values I need to keyframe for the movement. And the way to start the keyframe animation is to click the key icon next to the values I want to change. So I click it for both the X and Y position. And you see that 2 keyframes for the X and Y position have appeared in the timeline at second 0 where I placed the marker. Next, I move the timeline marker to the very end of the animation and move the dinosaur where I want it to be at the end. Halfway through the animation, I want the dinosaur to be somewhat lower than it currently is. So I move the timeline marker to about the middle of the animation and place the dinosaur where I want it to be. you can see that two new keyframes for the X and Y position have appeared. And now if I move the timeline marker or play back the animation, you can see that it automatically moves the dinosaur between the individual keyframes. I want the dinosaur to look into the direction it's flying, so let's add some rotation keyframes as well. So I click the key icon next to the angle value, which defines the rotation. Next, I keyframe the rotation angle at the key positions. Here I made a little mistake where the dinosaur does not fly up at the end, so I'm going to correct that. And now the dinosaur is beautifully flying across the canvas. I pause the animation by pressing spacebar, and now let's repeat exactly the same thing for the second flying dinosaur, setting up the position and rotation angle keyframes. And there you have it. Now we have two dinosaurs flying beautifully across the sky. Now let me reduce the size of the timeline to make some space for the node graph. I want to show you a few more tricks to make this look even cooler. When a huge meteor is falling from the sky, it's gonna light up the clouds and the sky and the entire area. So, to assimilate this effect, I'm going to make the sky light up and light down. And just as I did with the meteor before, I will do that with the help of the bloom node effect. I move into the color section and add a bloom node. Inside the input node, I select the background layer. I connect the input node to the bloom effect, and I want to create such an effect where it flares up and down. Just as with the meteor, for that I will use the time sign modifier. I connect the sign modifier to the bloom amount. Now this is clearly shining up way too bright, so I reduce the upper range of the sign modifier. Then I'm going to decrease the speed of the sign modifier and play around with the values until I have a result I like. Another really cool effect that we can add to the scene, which will make it much more alive and dynamic, is to have fire sparkles float through the air. And we can achieve that effect with particles. So let's create a new emitter with a particle inside, and then drag the emitter to the very top of the layers hierarchy. Then the first thing I want to do is to increase the emission area so that the particles are floating across the entire screen. So I increase the width and the height of the emitter until it covers the entire canvas. Now you already have this nice feeling of particles floating through the air. Let me quickly rename emitter and particles. And next, let's modify the particles to make them look much more like fire sparkles. In the Particles Properties panel, I first start out in the Color tab. Let's select the Fire preset. And for a smooth transition, let's set the birth and death alpha values to 0. Overall, the particle's color is too reddish for me, so I'm gonna change the midlife color to more of a yellow color. Nice. Next I go into the Library panel, and here I select the default smoke particle. Actually, that doesn't look very well. I don't like it, so let's move into the Fire section. And here I select a particle image that I prefer. From here, let's move back into the Properties pane into the Size tab and drastically reduce the size. I make sure that there's a slight difference between the minimum and maximum value to get some variation between the individual particles. Now let's move into the Life tab and increase the particle's lifespan. Then I move into the Direction tab, and since I don't want the particles to move in one straight line, I'm adding a direction increase. And now the particles move in a curve. They don't move in the straight line anymore, which is more realistic. To have the particles rotate, I will add an angle increase. And now you see that the particles are turning and rotating. Nice! I have a feeling there are too many particles on the canvas. So, to reduce the amount, I will have to modify the emitter. So I go ahead and select the emitter in the layers tree, and inside the properties panel, I'm going to reduce the emission chance. So that right now, only 49% of the particles are spawning. Actually, I'm going to reduce that even more. Great! I like that. And to complete the scene, you could now add the meteor yourself, following my first tutorial. For now, let me show you two more effects that you can add to the entire animation to make it look way more dramatic. So I want to apply two effects to the entire scene. To do that, first I add a new input node in the I/O section, and next I'm adding a CRT node, which you find in the general section. And then I connect the effect to the input node. And it immediately creates this awesome and cool movie effect. I'm gonna play around with the settings a little bit until I get the results I like. Great! A second cool effect we can add is the shake node. You can find it in the general section. I connect the shake node to our effect chain, and as soon as I increase the values, our scene starts shaking, which would make a meteor flying towards the Earth look so much more dramatic. And there you have it. You learned how to animate images, create keyframe animations, create cool particles and cinematic effects. I hope you enjoyed it and it has been helpful. If it was, feel free to leave a like. If you have any further questions, don't hesitate to ask in the comments. I will make sure to answer every question. If you remain subscribed to the email list, you will continue to receive special access to material, such as tutorials or special offers. Obviously, you're always free to unsubscribe. In any case, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, have fun animating!